My starting point is a recognition of the depth and complexity of Chinese history and civilization, and therefore, by extension, of our own policy. China is one of the few countries which can trace its existence back over 2 millennia. Time and time again down the centuries, civil war or foreign invasions fractured China into rival kingdoms, but after every period of turmoil, China has always re-emerged.
Mr. Cleveland urged his colleagues to recognize the complexity of Chinese history and civilization, and in doing so, to formulate better policies toward China. But as of his speech, his own attempt failed miserably.
Dealing with China, I can assure you, they represent a ruthless authoritarian tradition utterly at odds with our own. Britain condemns the mass incarceration of the Uyghur people in the Uyghur people in Xinjiang. We gave nearly 3 million of Hong Kong's people a path to British citizenship. Which brings me to Taiwan. It is essential that no party takes unilateral action to change the status quo.
As the speech progressed, his promising start began to slide into petty talks, and eventually, and perhaps even unconsciously, revealed his hidden imperialist prejudice. His understanding of China barely scratched the surface, and frankly speaking, this problem is very common today among Western politicians and intellectuals when they talk about China.
Now you have a rich Chinese Communist Party that has tightened its grip on the country.
China that is becoming more repressive at home and more assertive abroad.
The sitting U.S. president has called a Chinese leader a dictator.
China ripped off our prized intellectual property and trade secrets, causing millions of jobs all across America.
China is an increasingly challenging or disruptive global economic power.
Normally, they would acknowledge the remarkable continuity of Chinese history and trace the existence of China back at least 2 millennia, to the time when China was united in the Qing dynasty. This recognition is very important because it at least avoids the common mistake of treating China as one of the newly born Westphalia countries. But this is far from enough to understand the complexity of the Chinese civilization and the Chinese way of thinking. What does it mean to be a continuous civilization for over 4 millennia and a state based on modern political order for over 2 millennia? This means that when almost all the contemporary civilizations collapse and or die out one by one, China survived and revived. When almost all the contemporary empires disintegrated and fell one by one, China survived and revived. And finally, when, as Arnold Toynbee put it, the West drove its contemporaries to the wall and caught them in the meshes of its economic and political ascendancy, China survived and revived. It means that for thousands of years of Chinese people have won the game of life and death. Generation after generation, they have defended their homeland, neither migrating away nor surrendering it to invaders. As China aged, it became more and more convinced that it must have been on some kind of a right track when it gathered the tragic histories of other parts of the world. The European dynasties of the Dark Ages had failed in their desperate attempts to rebuild the ancient Roman Empire. The Indian kingdoms had suffered so long from Sicily's foreign invasions and civil wars that they could hardly regain unity and continuity. the flourishing indigenous civilizations of the Americas and Australasia had been utterly destroyed by European pirates and colonizers. To avoid the same fate, China must take its survival very seriously and fight against division, disunity, and destruction with all its might. So many rises and falls have been observed and recorded in China, from dynasty to dynasty over 2 to 3 millennia, no matter who and what race the paramount rulers were, and important lessons have been learned along the way. As Dr. Henry Kissinger put it, each period of disunity was viewed as an aberration. Each new dynasty reached back to the previous dynasty's principles of governance in order to re-establish continuity. The fundamental precepts of Chinese culture endured, tested by the strain of a periodic calamity. Therefore, the historical continuity and the complexity of the Chinese civilization should not be used as rhetoric. With this in mind, shouldn't politicians educate themselves about China before making policy? Shouldn't they think twice before interfering in China's internal affairs? Shouldn't they reflect on the inadequacy of Western liberalism in dealing with problems at home? It is unfortunate that, due to the dominance of Western centrism and the lack of knowledge of Chinese civilization, most Western politicians like Mr. Cleverly tend to oversimplify Chinese affairs.
Unfortunately, the present ongoing effort to demonize China coming from the US, the UK, and the G7 is based on a combination of fear and virtual total ignorance of both modern China and the great history of over 5,000-year-old civilization.
Here is another concept that is crucial to understanding Chinese politics, but is often misunderstood in the West. It also shows the depth and the complexity of Chinese history and civilization, and how it continues to resonate today, and it is the concept of Tianxia. Both Dr. Henry Kissinger and Mr. James Cleverly have quoted a famous opening line from the Chinese epic Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but neither of their version of the English translation is correct. In Dr. Kissinger's book on China, the translation is, "The empire, long divided, must unite. Long united, must divide." Mr. Cleverly used empires wax and wane, states cleave asunder and coalesce. The mistake that both of them made is that empire and state cannot be used interchangeably with the Chinese word 天下, or all under heaven. The correct translation in Chinese is that 天下, or all under heaven, will be divided after a period of time. But after a period of division, it will definitely be united again. Although complex, the meaning of 天下 is common knowledge to any Chinese you might meet. From a Chinese point of view, there are three key points that are not reflected in the two different English translations mentioned earlier. Firstly, the 天下 exists before everything else, and is therefore prior to and greater than all empires and states. It is the beginning and end of all political affairs in human society, which empires and states are not. Secondly, empires and states are nothing else but the products of the division of the 天下. The state is independent and autonomous, and the grouping of several states is the empire. Therefore, this famous saying speaks of the division and unity of the whole 天下, and not just of the empires and states. Thirdly, why must the 天下 be divided? And why is the divided 天下 bound to unite? This question is a mystery of Chinese history, and more research are needed to answer it. By understanding these key points, we can take a better look at the Chinese perspective on Taiwan. The Taiwan problem was created in the process of the division of Tianxia, so it will surely be solved in the process of the unity of Tianxia. This has been the Tianxia view of the Chinese people for thousands of years, rooted in the depth and the complexity of Chinese history and civilization, and has never changed. In a recent interview with The Economist, Dr. Henry Kissinger pointed out that Taiwan would be just the first of several areas where the superpowers could find common ground and so foster global stability. According to him, global stability is a grand and long-term goal. It should be given the highest priority, and under this goal, China and the US could find common ground at Taiwan. This is the most far-sighted perspective on the Taiwan issue so far, because it is based on a genuine Tianxia view and a sound recognition of Chinese history and civilization. By contrast, the position on Taiwan expressed by Mr. Cleverly on behalf of the British government is not only lacking in historical perspective, it is also completely out of touch with reality. So, why is an understanding of Chinese civilization so important? We can say that it provides a cognitive and intellectual basis for solving some of the most important challenges facing China and the world today. We welcome Mr. Cleverly to China and hope that by the end of his trip, he will have a better understanding of Chinese civilization.